Hello, my dear bio students. As part of your module number 3, I'll only be discussing the topic on the cell. So it means I'll leave to you the chemical basis of life. So try to study the different inorganic compounds. So take note, no? Inorganic compounds include we have water, then we have the acids and bases, and then we have the gases. We have carbon dioxide and oxygen. And when we go to the discussion on cellular respiration, now you would know the importance of oxygen and the importance also of carbon dioxide. Okay. And of course, you have the organic compounds. Organic compounds include the carbohydrates, the proteins, the lipids, and the nucleic acids. So again, study them very well because they would always be related to other topics. And then read also on the cell concept, especially the different scientists who contributed to the study of the cells. Okay. So again, I'll be discussing uh, all about the cell. Okay, so I'm just checking if I was able to record the video. So anyway, no. Okay. Okay, so um, if you can still recall your introduction, so it stated there that one of the unifying theories in biology is the cell theory. Okay, which states that all living organisms are made up of cells and that cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so there were no cells which abruptly appeared. Okay, so all cells came from pre-existing cells. Like for example, human being. So a human being came from pre-existing cells. Two pre-existing cells. You have the egg and the sperm. Okay, coming from the parents. Okay. Okay, now what are the basic cell types? So again, this is a very common concept in biology. Okay, it's a very basic concept in biology. So the cell types are the prokaryotic cell, okay, and then we have the eukaryotic cell. So what is basically the main difference na, between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell? So from the prefixes, pro meaning before, and eu meaning true, and the suffix karyon, okay, meaning nucleus. So you have here before nucleus, and then you have here true nucleus. Okay, so a eukaryotic cell is said to have a true nucleus. Okay, which means that the genetic material, okay, the chromosomes inside the nucleus, they are separated, no, from the rest of the cellular components. Okay, because of the presence of the nuclear membrane. Okay, so the chromosomes, they are compartmentalized within the nuclear membrane. Okay, whereas in a prokaryote, so again, pro meaning before and karyon meaning nucleus. So a prokaryotic cell has no true nucleus because the genetic material is found in the cytoplasm. So there is the absence of a nuclear envelope, okay, that would confine the genetic material. So again, no, instead of calling it the nucleus, okay, the structure is called a nucleoid. So this is the naked genetic material. Okay, so that's the basic difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. No, the presence and the absence of a well-defined nucleus. And again, the criterion, okay, that sets the presence of a defined nucleus is the presence of the nuclear membrane. Okay. Now, what about the other basic differences? There are a lot of differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but we are going to mention a few. Okay. when you go to your higher biology subjects, so you would discuss the differences in detail. Okay. So another difference, okay, is in the number of chromosomes. Okay, so a prokaryotic cell has one chromosome, and the chromosome is made up of a single loop of DNA. Okay, whereas eukaryotic cells, no, a eukaryotic cell contains numerous chromosomes, and each chromosome is made up of a linear DNA. So if you can recall your topic on the organic compounds, you have the nucleic acids, no? The nucleic acids are the DNA and the RNA. So you have to be familiar with the structure of a DNA and an RNA. And if you can still recall, a DNA of a eukaryotic cell is made up of two strands, which are forming a helix. Okay, so that's the second basic difference. Okay, another basic difference is in their size. So generally, generally prokaryotic cells, they are smaller, okay, compared to a eukaryotic cell. So typically, a prokaryotic cell measures from zero point 0.5 to 5 microns. Typically, not typically, we're not saying that's the only range. Some prokaryotes can even measure up to 100 microns. No, but we're saying is generally, no, they measure from zero point 0.5 to 5 microns, okay, in length. Whereas a eukaryotic cell is generally larger than a prokaryotic cell. And of course, the size depends on the cell type. Like for example, no, if you've already measured an RBC, no, in the laboratory, so that's included in your exercise in micrometry. So an RBC's diameter is about 7 microns. So if you have a monocyte, which is the largest WBC, it's about 20 microns. Okay, so what we're saying is prokaryotic cells are generally smaller than that of the eukaryotic cells. Okay, another basic difference is the presence of the membrane-bound organelles. So these are examples of membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so you have here the endomembrane system organelles. You have here the mitochondrion. In plants, you have the chloroplast. Okay, so they are present, of course, in eukaryotic cells, and they are absent in prokaryotic cell, of course, no? So the prokaryotic cell is very, very small. So how would you expect that the membrane-bound organelles will be present inside a very, very small cell? Okay. So the only organelle which is found in both the prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell is the ribosome. So the small dots that you see. Okay, so you have here a ribosome. And the ribosomes are very important in protein synthesis. Okay, so another basic difference, you have the covering. So both the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell are covered with the cell membrane. And then an additional layer is found in a prokaryotic cell. You have the cell wall. Okay, in eukaryotic cells, no, the cell wall can only be found in plant cells and fungal cells. Okay, and then apart from the cell membrane and the cell wall, you have a third layer. Okay, you have the glycocalyx. Okay, so from the term glyco, no, glycocalyx, so it means that the layer is very rich in carbohydrates. Okay, and the glycocalyx in prokaryotic cell functions mainly in protecting the organism. Okay, whereas the glycocalyx, so it's not shown in this example, but our plant cell, animal cells, no, they also have the glycocalyx part. Okay, if you're going to take note of the surfaces of the membrane, you have there a lot of carbohydrate components. So, and the glycocalyx in eukaryotic cell functions in cell-to-cell recognition and communication because the cells, they can recognize different cell types. Okay, a skin cell can recognize another skin cell. A liver cell can recognize another liver cell. White blood cells can recognize a variety of cells now because of the carbohydrate moieties no, on the surface of the membrane. Okay. So I guess no, those are the basic differences. But then again, there are a lot of differences. Like for example, you have here the presence of the fimbriae, you have the presence of the sex pillows in prokaryotes. Okay, and you might ask, what are examples of prokaryotes? So bacteria are examples of prokaryotes, and you know that bacteria are very small. Okay, okay. What about the three structural parts of a generalized animal cell? Okay, so when you say three structural parts, so when you look at the micrograph of an animal cell, now when you look at an image of an animal cell or a plant cell, okay, basically you see three structures. Okay, so three structures are visible. So those are the cell membrane, then we have the cytoplasm, and then third you have the nucleus. Okay, so when you look through the microscope, you see these three. Of course, you don't see very distinct organelles. Okay, you see dots no, and lines no, within the cell, but of course, you cannot distinguish the organelles from one another. Okay, so the cell membrane, okay, is also called the plasma membrane or the plasmalemma. And this is the outer limiting membrane. It actually protects the cell. So without the cell membrane, the cell will not survive. Okay? And the biological cell membrane is said to be very choosy. It's very selective. So the proper term, okay, that we are using is being semi-permeable or semi-permeable. Okay? Our biological membrane is semi-permeable. So it means it's choosy. Okay, it selects, okay, semi-permeable. Okay, it selects substances that can enter and exit the cell. Okay, so the second structural part is the cytoplasm. So recall now when you had your high school biology, the cytoplasm now was defined as the living component of the cell. So if you're going to remove all the organelles, okay, you have the nucleus, you have the other membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so the semi-solid, semi-liquid part, okay, that remains, that's the cytoplasm. Okay, and the cytoplasm contains the different inorganic and organic compounds necessary for all phases of metabolism of the cell. Okay, the cytoplasm also suspends, okay, those chemicals, those compounds, and the organelles. Okay? And the semi-fluid part of the cytoplasm is called the cytosol. So from the prefix cyto, ketos meaning cell, and sol meaning solution. Or we also call that the ICF or the intracellular fluid. So the prefix intra means inside. So the fluid inside the cell. And you know that the cell is, the cytoplasm is made up of 80 to 90% of water. That's why water is a very important inorganic compound. No? One of the physiological properties of water is that this serves as a medium for almost all chemical reactions happening inside the cell or happening within the cell. Okay? Okay, so next we have the nucleus. So the nucleus is the most obvious, so that's the biggest part of the cell. That's the most conspicuous part of the cell. So once you peep through the microscope, through the ocular, once you see the image, now you would see the nucleus. And in an animal cell, usually the nucleus is at the center. Okay, it's the control center of the cell. Okay. Okay. Um, okay, going back, under the microscope, okay, when you look at the image or a micrograph of a cell, okay, you see that the cell membrane is just a simple line, okay? But if you're going to get a piece of the cell membrane and then mount it and examine it under the electron microscope especially, you would see that it's not very simple, that it's not just made up of a line. Okay, it's very, very complicated. Okay, and it's stated that the functions of the cell membrane depend solely on the structure of the membrane. Okay, and in terms of organization, in terms of structure, the cell membrane follows the fluid mosaic model developed by Singer and Nicholson in 1972. Okay, so being a mosaic, so it means that the cell membrane is made up of very, very small pieces, okay, fitted together to form a larger structure. Okay, according to this model, no, the cell membrane is a mosaic of proteins, okay, floating like icebergs on a sea of lipids. Okay, so if you can recall your paper mosaic or your egg mosaic, no, during your elementary days, you were asked to cut the paper into small bits and pieces, and you were asked to crush the eggshell into small pieces, and then later, no, you were asked to glue them together to form another structure or a bigger structure. So that's a mosaic. Okay, so again, the cell membrane is a mosaic of small parts, okay, that are fitted together to form a more complicated structure. Okay, and it's called fluid, okay, because the fluidity of the membrane is very dependent on the phospholipid molecules. So we are going to discuss this now when we go to the membrane components. And it's stated that in order for the biological membrane to function, it has to be in its fluid nature. Okay, and this would be explained further when you discuss the different processes. You have the different passive and active transports or processes. So that would be discussed in your botany. Or I'm not sure if you have discussed them already. Okay, so remember earlier, so we said that the a eukaryotic cell also has the glycocalyx part. Okay, so you have here the glycocalyx part. So it's really not very simple. It's really very chaotic. Now you have the presence of a lot of carbohydrates. Okay, and they are very important in cell-to-cell recognition and communication. Okay, so let's try to discuss the components in details. So we have here, okay, different types of membrane lipids, and we have, of course, we have the proteins. Okay, so among the lipids, the phospholipids, okay, they constitute 75% of the membrane. So you have here the phospholipid bilayer. And if you're going to further explain the structure, okay, so you have here, it's called the phospholipid bilayer because you have two layers. You have an upper layer and you have a lower layer. Okay, and you try to see the arrangement of the bilayer. You try to see the composition of a phospholipid molecule. So if you have a molecule, it's made up of a phosphate head and you have two lipid tails. Hence, the term phospholipid. Okay, and since the phospholipids, they form a bilayer, so we describe the membrane, no, as the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and in terms of organization or orientation, why do you think that this is the arrangement? So you have head, tails, and then tails, head. Not head, tails, not tails, head, tails. So why is it tail, heads? Sorry, head, tails, and then tails, head. So this is the natural orientation or the natural arrangement of the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, it's because of the nature of each molecule, no? The phospholipids are said to be amphipathic. So amphi meaning dual. It has a dual nature. So the phosphate heads are polar, and being polar, they are hydrophilic. Okay, hydro meaning water, philia meaning loving. So they love water. So they tend to associate themselves, okay, with areas containing water. So if you're going to imagine this, no, as a cell with the outer component and the inner component, or with the external environment and the internal environment, no? So both environments consist mostly of water. So outside, so we have the extracellular fluid, so the fluid outside of the cell, so extra meaning outside. And inside, we have the intracellular fluid. So since both environments are made up mostly of water, so the phosphate heads tend to associate themselves now with these areas. Okay, so that's why they are facing areas with water. And since the lipids, no, remember your topic on the different organic compounds. So lipids, they are grouped together because of their solubility property. So they are all nonpolar molecules. And being nonpolar, they are hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water, phobia meaning fear. So they fear water. Okay, so since they fear water, so they tend to associate themselves, okay, in between the phosphate heads. So they are sandwiched in between the phosphate heads. Okay, so that's why this is the natural orientation of the phospholipid bilayer. And the orientation dictates the functions of the membrane. And I said earlier that in order for the biological membrane to function, it should be in its fluid nature. So fluidity actually depends on the presence of the tails, no, the lipid tails. So if you're going to, again, get one molecule, okay, you would see that the tails are not really very straight. Now they have bends or they have kinks, okay? They have bends or they have kinks. Okay, and the bends or the kinks, they actually represent double bonds in the molecule, in the fatty acids. Okay, so again, recall your lesson on the different organic compounds. Remember the lipids. So the building blocks of lipids are the glycerol and the fatty acids. And we have two types of fatty acids, if you can recall. So we have here the saturated fatty acid, letter A, and the unsaturated fatty acid, letter B. So when you say saturated, all carbon atoms are bonded to hydrogen atoms, hence saturated. And when you say unsaturated, okay, not all carbon atoms are bonded to hydrogen atoms. So in areas, okay, where you see double bonds, okay, between carbon atoms, so you have there the formation of kinks or bends, okay? And if you're going to, for example, arrange or organize saturated fatty acids, no, for example, one on top of the other, so you can actually stack them very well, okay, because the fatty acid part is straight, right? That's why it's stated that triacylglycerols or triglycerides containing more saturated fatty acids tend to be solid at room temperature. That's why we have the animal fats. Okay? And those triacylglycerols or triglycerides containing more of the unsaturated fatty acids, they tend to be more fluid at room temperature. Hence, we are calling them vegetable oils. Because if you're going to stack the fatty acids, okay, you would have a lot of spaces. Okay? And in at room temperature, no, this triacylglycerols or this type of lipid, no, would be fluid, would be liquid at room temperature. Okay, so if you're going to cook, okay, using an animal fat or a vegetable oil, no? Like for example, using butter and vegetable oil, so which would be healthier? So foods that are cooked using vegetable oil, so they are healthier compared to foods that were cooked using animal fat. But of course, no, those cooked using butter, they taste better. They are tastier. So the more in relation to lipids, the tastier the food, the unhealthier, okay, the food is. That's why um, we have a joke, no? So when persons get sick, they don't want to go to the hospital because they don't like the taste of food. So they would say, ano bang pagkain yan? Lasang ospital, pagkain ospital. So ibig sabihin, um, those foods that are served in the hospital for patients, no, they have less salt, they have less sugar, they have less fats. So they don't really taste very good or very nice. Anyway, but they're healthier, no? So yeah. So again, no? So what I'm trying to say is again, okay, the fluidity of the membrane dictates the functions of the membrane. And the fluidity is because of the presence of more unsaturated fatty acids in the phosphate in the lipid tails of the bilayer. Okay. Okay. So the second component we have here the glycolipids. So the glycolipids, okay, they constitute 5% of the membrane. So you have here one glycolipid, you have another glycolipid. So from the term glyco, lipid, so you have a combination of carbohydrates and fats. So the green hexagonal structures here, they represent the monosaccharides. So you have here a polysaccharide, okay, attached to the lipid tails. Hence, we call the molecule the glycolipid, okay? And in terms of location, the glycolipids are found only on the upper bilayer. And the carbohydrate parts, okay, they are exposed to the extracellular fluid. Why? Now, because in terms of function, the glycolipids, they act as markers. They are for cell-to-cell communication and recognition. So as I've said earlier, cells are able to recognize, okay, and they are able to adhere to one another, no, if they belong to the same group, no, if the cells belong to the same tissue, so they can recognize each other, they can adhere. Okay, it's like, for example, our white blood cells. The white blood cells can recognize cells of the body. They can also recognize foreign cells or intruders because of the markers. And the markers are again um, actually examples of glycolipids. Just like students, you have IDs, you have tags. So in relation to a cell, the carbohydrate part that actually tags the cell, no? It provides an ID for the cell. Okay? So the cell is so amazing. No? It's so nice because as simple as it is under the microscope, so you would see that the cell is not that simple at all. Okay? Okay. Third membrane lipid, we have cholesterol, the orange one. So you have your cholesterol, cholesterol here and here and here. Okay? And in terms of location, they are alternating. So you have here one attached to the lower bilayer, and then upper, and then lower again, and then upper, and then lower again. Okay? So again, cholesterol constitutes 20% of the cell. And the presence of the cholesterol molecule strengthens the membrane. Okay, but the more cholesterol molecules are present, no, the less fluid the membrane is. Okay, so cholesterol molecules, they strengthen the membrane, but they decrease the flexibility of the membrane. Okay, so don't worry. Naturally, cholesterol molecules are part of our cell membrane. But what happens if people tend to eat a lot of foods rich in cholesterol? So imagine, no, you would have a lot of cholesterol embedded in the bilayer. And some people, they also form plaques. Okay. So if there is an increase in the number of cholesterol molecules in the bilayer, so the membrane becomes stronger, but it becomes less flexible. That's why, those people suffering from or experiencing hypertension or high blood pressure, so some of them experience rupture, rupturing of the blood vessels. It's because if plaque deposits, in the blood vessels, so the deposit makes the blood vessel less flexible. So sometimes, it cannot accommodate the high pressure of blood. So this can lead to the bursting of the blood vessel. So it's not really very, very good. And of course, most of the bursting uh, cause fatalities. Okay, so the lesson is don't eat food with too much cholesterol. Okay, so what about the membrane protein? So we have two types. We have the integral or the intrinsic proteins, and then we have the peripheral or the extrinsic proteins. Okay, so these are the integral proteins. Okay, and they are called integral proteins because they span the entire bilayer. So they are inserted through the bilayer. Okay, and most of the integral proteins are glycoproteins. Okay, so again, you have the presence of the carbohydrate part. And the carbohydrate parts, again, they tag the cells. Okay, so just imagine different cell types. And on the surfaces of the cell types, you have a lot of markers, different markers, for cell-to-cell communication and recognition. So don't think that the cell membrane is very simple. It's really very complicated. No, it's much more complicated than you think. Okay, so going back. Now, the peripheral proteins are called as such because they are bound to the surfaces, okay, of the bilayer, either on the upper bilayer or the lower bilayer. And since they are peripheral in nature, they can easily be removed from the membrane, unlike the integral proteins, now, which are really embedded through the bilayer. Okay. Now, I said earlier that the functions of the cell membrane depend on the structure of the membrane. So the fluidity is due to the phospholipid bilayer, and the specific functions are dictated by the functions of the different integral proteins. Okay, so if you're going to compare this cell to De La Salle University Dasmariñas, the phospholipid bilayer is actually the fence. Okay, and the integral proteins, no, they are the guard houses with our security guards. Okay, they are responsible for choosing, no, for selecting who can enter who can enter and exit the university. Okay, so they are very, very strict. That's why we're saying that the biological membrane is semi-permeable. It's choosy, it's selective. Not everything can pass through the bilayer. So if that happens, no, the cell can immediately die because toxins can pass through, harmful substances can pass through that can cause death. Okay, now let's try to see the different functions of integral proteins. Okay, some integral proteins can function as a channel or a pore. Okay, so if you're going to slice or cut or make a lateral section of a protein, okay, you would see that there is a channel or a canal or a pore, okay, which now allows the passage of substances across the membrane. Okay, So that's an example. And most of the proteins, no, most of the integral proteins are channel proteins. Now, another function of an integral protein is that it can act as a carrier or a transporter. So unlike the channel or a pore, okay, there is no passageway. Okay, there is no canal. So how would a carrier protein or transporter protein carry substances across the membrane? Okay, so that is by changing its shape. So usually energy is needed, no? So energy in the form of ATP. So you're going to discuss this in the active processes. Okay, so ATP, energy from ATP or electrons now will be supplied, and this energy will be utilized by the carrier protein to change its shape. Okay, so that it can again um, carry or transport substances across the membrane. So another function, an integral protein can act as a cell recognition protein or a cell identity marker. And again, no, that's attributed to the presence of carbohydrate parts on the glycoprotein molecule. Okay, so again, this carbohydrate parts, they act as labels or tags or ID so that the cells can be recognized by other cells. Okay? Ang galing, di ba? So the cells are able to identify each other because of these markers. And this is the importance of, for example, if you're familiar with the ABO blood grouping, no, blood typing. So if a person no, has blood type A, he or she has a carbohydrate, okay, that represents antigen A on the surface of his or her erythrocyte. And that antigen will be recognized by other cells. So that's why uh, during our discussion of in the discussion of the circulatory system, we are going to discuss this, no? You have the incompatible and the compatible blood transfusions. And the transfusion is actually dependent on the antigens and the antibodies. No, the antigens found on the surfaces of the red blood cells and the antibodies found in the plasma of the blood. Okay, another function of an integral protein is that it can act as a receptor. So from the term receptor, okay, a protein is able to receive a signal. Okay, a signal that is carried by a particular chemical. So in this case, you have here say this is a hormone. Okay, you have a follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so the hormone, now, before it can affect the cell, it has to be received by its receptor found on the membrane. And as you can see, there the surfaces of the hormone and the receptor are complementary, just like the lock and the key. So they perfectly fit. Okay. So when the hormone is received by the receptor, so that's the time that it can affect the cell. And based from its name, follicle stimulating hormone, so it's a hormone that tells the ovary or the testes, okay, to produce follicles so that eggs and sperm cells can be produced. Okay, so when you go to the discussion of the endocrine system, now you are going to see a lot of hormones in their target organs or their target cells. Another function, okay, an integral protein can act as an enzyme. And you know that enzymes are organic chemical regulators. Enzymes are catalysts. They hasten chemical reactions without themselves being affected in the process. Okay? In this example, this integral protein can cut or split or simplify more complex substrates. Okay? So that's an example of an enzyme. Not all enzymes um, are able to split a particular substrate or a particular chemical, some enzymes can synthesize. Like in the discussion of cellular respiration, no, you would see that an integral protein, it's called ATP synthase. So from the term ATP synthase, it's an enzyme that synthesizes, that makes ATP. Okay? And last but not the least, an integral protein, okay, can function as a cytoskeleton anchor. So you have here the representation of the cell membrane, and for the position of the cell membrane to be stabilized, it is now anchored to cytoskeletal fibers or cytoskeletal elements. Okay, so again, when you look through the microscope, okay, if you're going to look at an ordinary micrograph, you don't see fibers inside the cytoplasm, but no, under the electron microscope, there are really a lot of fibers making up the framework of the cell. So again, in order to stabilize the location of the cell membrane, no, it's now anchored to cytoskeletal elements, to cytoskeletal filaments. Just like the purpose of an anchor to a ship. So when the anchor is thrown away, but it lets the ship stay in its place. Okay. Now, apart from the basic structural parts of a cell, you have the cell membrane, you have the nucleus, and then you have the cytoplasm. Of course, we have the discussion of the different organelles. And organelles are called as such now because they are highly organized structures with characteristic shapes and are capable of performing specific functions. That's why they are referred to as organelles or little organs now within the cells. And like the regular organs of the body, our different organs have different functions, and the combined functions of the different organs, of course, results to the survival of the organism. Okay, so just the same, the different functions of the different organelles, the interplay, no, of the functions of the different organelles also lead to the survival of the cell. Okay. Now the organelles can be grouped into 5. So we have the nucleus and the ribosomes. So the nucleus is not only a typical part of the cell, but of course it's, the most conspicuous organelle. Okay, second group, you have the endomembrane system organelles, and then the energy-related organelles. So they have something to do with production of energy. And then you have the peroxisomes and the vacuoles and the cytoskeleton. Okay, and after the organelles, we'll have a discussion of the inclusions. So inclusions are temporary structures within the cell. Okay, so let's discuss first the nucleus. So the nucleus is the biggest part. It's the most conspicuous part. It's the most obvious part of the cell. So again, if you're going to peep through the microscope, you see immediately the nucleus. And in an animal cell or in animal cells, no, the nucleus is usually at the center of the cell. Okay. So what about the components? So you have the nuclear membrane, and then you have the nucleolus. Okay, and then you have the chromatin network. Okay, the lines that you see. So you have here the chromatin network. Okay. Now, in terms of function, the nucleus is regarded as the control center of the cell. Okay, it controls all the activities of the cells, and that's because of the presence of the chromosome. No, especially you have the DNA. The DNA containing the genes. Okay, and the genes are expressed into proteins. Okay. So first part, you have the nuclear membrane or the nuclear envelope. If you're going to look closely, okay, the both layers of the nuclear envelope are made up of the phospholipid bilayer, same phospholipid bilayer as that of the cell membrane. Of course, without the presence of the different integral proteins. Okay, but the proteins, they actually form they are arranged, no, to form a ring. And this arrangement actually forms the nuclear pore. Okay, so there are pores or openings, or I jokingly call them butases. Okay, plural for butas is butases. So, of course, no, there's no technical term butases, ha? Sa akin lang galing yun. Okay? So, the nuclear pores are said to be 10 times larger in diameter compared to your channel protein, no, to the integral protein. And there should be, okay, the presence of nuclear pores in order to allow larger substances to exit the nucleus. So for example, you have messenger RNA, you have protein, so they are very large. And they cannot really pass through the bilayer. So they have to exit via the nuclear pores. Okay? And under the electron microscope, you have here a micrograph, okay, showing the different, or showing numerous nuclear pores, now for the transport of substances outside the nucleus. Okay. Now, another part is the nucleolus. The nucleus can be described as, the nucleolus can be described as a nucleus within a nucleus. And it's actually an aggregation or a collection of DNA, RNA, and proteins. And in terms of function, the nucleolus is the site, for the assembly of the ribosomes, assembly of the ribosomal parts, which would be discussed later. So it means that if the ribosomes are assembled within the nucleolus, so it has something to do with protein synthesis. That's why the nucleolus disappears during cell division. Okay. Now, another component of the nucleus is the chromatin network. Okay. So if we're going to look at a cell undergoing interphase, okay, the resting state now of the cell, you have here the nucleus. You would see that there are dots. So these dots, they actually represent the chromatin network. Okay, so what's the chromatin network? Now, what's chromatin? So in a non-dividing cell, okay, the DNA and the associated proteins, they are loosely arranged, okay, forming the chromatin network. So ito, you have here the entire chromatin network. And under the microscope, no, under the electron microscope, and a chromatin network appears like beads on a string. So if you're familiar with rosary beads, no, with a rosary, so that's the appearance of the chromatin network. There are beads and there are linker threads, and then another bead, and then another linker thread. Okay? So a chromatin is actually made up of a DNA, okay, which is wrapped twice around a core of 8 proteins. Okay, so those simple proteins are called histones. Okay, so each bead, now each bead is called a nucleosome. Okay, nucleosome. Okay, pardon my handwriting. Yan. And then a nucleosome is connected, okay, to another nucleosome via a linker DNA, and so on and so forth. So again, under the microscope, under the electron microscope, the chromatin network appears like beads on a string. Okay, so each nucleosome that you see is actually this dot. Yan. Yan. So these dots that you see, they are nucleosomes. And again, now when the cell is not dividing, this is the extent of DNA packing. Okay, the DNA and the associated proteins, they are loosely arranged. Okay, now in preparation for cell division, the DNA and the associated proteins, they start to coil. Okay, they now condense until you have the formation of a chromosome. Okay, and the condensation, the importance of condensation will be explained when we go to the topic on cell division. Okay, so why is it that the DNA has to be condensed? Okay, prior to cell division, prior to the division of the daughter cells. So what happens if the DNA molecules will not thicken or will not condense into chromosomes? Okay. Okay, another organ you have the ribosomes. So you have here a representation of the subunits. You have the small subunit and then you have the large subunit. So for a ribosome to function, the subunits should combine. Okay, they should be associated to one another. And if you can recall the topic on organic compounds, a ribosome is capable of reading a messenger RNA, okay, which contains coded information. For that coded information to be translated into proteins. So anyway, now we are going to go back to that function. So again, the ribosomes, they function in protein synthesis. So if you're going to compare a cell to a factory, the ribosomes are the factory workers. They are the producers of the different products. Now, there are two types of ribosomes. You have the free and the attached ribosome. So from the term, you have the free ribosomes. Okay, so the dots that you see in the cytoplasm, these are the free ribosomes. And then you have the attached ribosomes. So they are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. So if the ribosomes function in protein synthesis, what do you think is the difference between the proteins that are synthesized by the free ribosomes and those that are synthesized by the attached ribosomes? Okay, the difference is in the destination. So the free ribosomes, they manufacture proteins for domestic use or for the use of the cell itself. And the attached ribosomes, they manufacture proteins, okay, usually for export use, for use outside of the cell. But there are also proteins that are manufactured to be used by the cell, okay? But again, those that are exported, those that exit the cell, they are manufactured by the attached ribosomes, okay? Okay, next group, we have the endomembrane system organelles. When you say endomembrane, so these organelles are bounded by the phospholipid bilayer and they are found within the cell. Okay, so the endomembrane system organelles include the nuclear envelope. As you can see in the previous discussion, the outer and the inner layers are also made up of phospholipid bilayer. Okay, so again, you have the nuclear envelope, and then you have the endoplasmic reticulum here. And then you have here the Golgi complex and the associated vesicles. Okay, so they are the members of the endomembrane system complex. Okay, so first we have the endoplasmic reticulum. So again, okay, the endoplasmic reticulum, as you can see in this illustration, okay, it's directly attached to the it directly communicates with the nuclear pores. Okay, because again, when proteins are produced inside the nucleus, so they go out and they are now processed within the uh, endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so going back, so the endoplasmic reticulum is actually made up of varying channels or channels of varying shapes and sizes. Okay, so we call each channel a cistern. Ito. So we call each channel a cistern or a cisterna or a saccule. So plural cisterns, cisternae, of course, saccules. Okay. And there are two types. So you have here the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and then you have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So again, okay, it's called RER or rough endoplasmic reticulum because it is studded with ribosomes. And of course, in the absence of ribosomes, so this one uh, is characterized as a smooth type of ER. Now, in terms of function, what do you think are the differences now between the functions of the rough ER and the SER? So we said earlier that the rough endoplasmic reticulum, okay, functions to produce proteins for domestic and for export use. And the smooth endoplasmic reticulum functions in lipid synthesis. So the RER is for protein synthesis and the SER is for lipid synthesis. So it's responsible for the production of phospholipids, the fatty acids, cholesterol rather, and other parts of the membrane. You have phospholipids, you have cholesterol, you have glycolipids. So they are manufactured here. Okay. Now another endomembrane system organelle is the Golgi complex or the Golgi apparatus. So like the ER, it's also made up of stacks. It's also made up of channels called cisterns or cisternae. And the difference is that the cisterns, they are stacked, like a pile of plates. And they have bulging ends. And these ends, they actually detach, forming the vesicles. You have the different transport vesicles here. Okay. And what's the purpose of uh, the Golgi complex? Again, if you're going back to the slide, okay, you have a very close association, with the endomembrane system organelles are closely associated with one another. They are very near one another. It's because of their functions. So what's the purpose of the Golgi apparatus or the Golgi complex? So this organelle processes, okay, processes, and then sorts, and then packages, and delivers proteins to their destinations. Okay, not only proteins, but also lipids now to their destination. So let's try to see. So you have here the relationship of an RER with a Golgi complex. So the RER is shown to produce proteins. So each shape here represents an amino acid. So you have an elongation. So meaning you have the synthesis of proteins. Okay. So, and the proteins are again synthesized by the ribosomes. So after production, the proteins will be enclosed now within a transport vesicle. So the vesicle is formed by the fusion of these parts of the membrane. Okay, so there would be an enclosure now. So from the term, the transport vesicle transfers or transports proteins from the RER going to the cistern, going to the Golgi complex. No? So the transport vesicle fuses with the cistern that is closest to the endoplasmic reticulum. So because of fusion, the proteins now they enter the lumen of the cistern. And the proteins, they are now processed. Okay? They are processed inside the lumen of the Golgi complex. So after processing, okay, the proteins again will be enclosed within a vesicle. And this vesicle now fuses with the next cistern. So again, there is continued processing. So after processing, again, the proteins will be transported to the next cistern, and so on and so forth. So as proteins are transferred from one cistern to the other, there is processing. And finally, Now, when processing, when reaching the final cistern or the last cistern, okay, the products are now sorted. Okay, and after sorting, they are now packaged. And once they are packaged, they are now delivered to their destinations. So some proteins for export, they are now carried out. So a secretory vesicle is formed. And this vesicle again fuses with the cell membrane. And the proteins now for export, they leave the cells going to their destination. Some proteins, some enzymes, they are now again enclosed within a vesicle, and this time it becomes an organelle. You have the lysosome, and this will be discussed later. Okay, so this is now um, the route of proteins. Okay, from the RER going to the Golgi complex, going to their destinations. So again, now the Golgi complex is very important in processing, in sorting, in packaging, and delivering proteins and lipids to their destinations. So a very simple analogy is a dairy factory. In a dairy factory, the raw material is milk. So milk is processed, and after processing, some milk can be transformed to different products. So it could become a fresh milk, a cheese, it could become ice cream, yogurt, cream, etc., etc. Okay? So after processing milk, okay, into different products, so the products are sorted, and then they are packaged and they are delivered. So that's the work of the Golgi complex. Okay? So this illustration shows you the route of proteins manufactured by the rough endoplasmic reticulum until these proteins are exported. And same route is followed by the lipids. So they are synthesized by the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, but they're also processed within the Golgi complex. Okay, until again uh, they are packaged and transported or distributed to their destinations. Okay, so going back, I forgot to mention. So aside from secretory proteins, aside from enzymes that are housed within a vesicle to form the lysosome, so some proteins are transported to the membrane. So remember the integral and the peripheral protein. So they're also products of the processing within the Golgi complex. Okay. Okay. So another organelle, okay, that is actually formed by the Golgi complex is the lysosome. Okay. And from the term lysosome, from if you're going to compare this to the Lysol. So Lysol is a disinfectant. No? It's utilized to clean, to disinfect areas. So that's also the work of the lysosomes. The lysosomes are considered to be the janitors of the cell. They're responsible for maintaining the cleanliness, the orderliness of the internal environment of the cell. Okay? And okay, you have here a representation of the lysosome. So within the lysosome are as much as 40 very powerful hydrolytic or digestive enzymes. And these enzymes are being utilized to maintain order within the cell. Okay? So these are the functions of the lysosome. So first you have intracellular digestion. So digestion happening within the cell. Okay? So some cells of the body, like for example, our white blood cells. Okay, so most of them are referred to as phagocytes or phagocytes. So you have here a phagocyte. So cyte meaning cell, okay, phagein meaning to eat. So this phagocyte is specialized, no, to eat intruders or foreign bodies. An example is a bacterium. Okay, so when we have foreign intruders, like a bacteria, so a bacterium can be recognized by a white blood cell. And after recognition, it can be engulfed, okay, within a phagosome. So the phagosome now fuses with the lysosome. And I said earlier that within a lysosome, there are as much as 40 digestive enzymes. Okay? So the enzymes now digest the intruder or the bacterium. And the parts are now recycled, no, for the use of the cell or for the use of, or for other processes, no, happening outside the cell. So this is a way, no, for our cell to protect us. Okay, it's by utilizing the enzymes contained within the lysosome. So another function is autophagy. When you say auto, it means self. Again, phagein meaning eating, so self-eating. So the lysosome does not only maintain the cleanliness of the cell, it also is able to recycle old and worn out organelles. Okay? So like for example, if you have portions of the Golgi complex, portions of the ER, or a mitochondrion which is very old and worn out, it cannot function anymore. So what a lysosome does is to engulf that organelle and then digest its components and recycle the components to be utilized by the cell. Okay? So there is recycling. Okay, there is recycling within the cell. And it's stated that our liver cells, they actually recycle their contents, no, half of their contents every week. And that's why they have a lot of lysosomes, no, with very strong or very powerful enzymes. Okay. So another function, we have autolysis. Lysis meaning splitting or breakdown. So self-breakdown. Okay, during, how do you pronounce this? During apoptosis, not apoptosis. Okay? So there is self-destruction, okay, during apoptosis or programmed cell death. Okay? Programmed cell death or apoptosis. Like for example, during the normal development of any vertebrate, no? Like for example, humans, other mammals, okay, reptiles. So once in our lifetime, okay, we were aquatic. And being aquatic, no, uh, we had tails, we had a tail, and we had webs in between the fingers and the toes. And in order for us to undergo normal embryonic development, so at some point, those webs have to be removed. And that's the work of the lysosomes. So during apoptosis or programmed cell death, they are actually rupturing, releasing their digestive enzymes. And because of that, the webs are now removed, no, from the fingers and the toes. So again, no, that's for us to undergo normal development. So apoptosis is actually normal. It happens. Like for example, no, if we have, we're going to discuss that in cell division. So those cells that are not really destined to divide, they undergo apoptosis or programmed cell death. Okay, in order not to really make several copies of cells, no, which are not needed by the body. Okay. Now another function of the lysosome is extracellular digestion. So this time, digestion happens outside of the cell. So for example, if you have wounds or cuts, okay, the lysosomes, they release their enzymes to clean cellular debris in order to prepare the area, the injured area for effective repair. Okay? So these are the functions of our lysosomes. Okay, another set or another group, you have the energy-related organelles. So they function in the production of energy, in the production of ATP. Okay, and we have two. So we have the mitochondrion. So I guess the mitochondrion is one of the most famous organelles because when you say mitochondrion, or you say powerhouse of the cell, because it's capable of producing ATP, okay, or adenosine triphosphate, which is a modified nucleic acid. No? Now, in terms of structure, it's a double membraned organelle. You have the presence of an outer mitochondrial membrane, which is smooth, and an inner mitochondrial membrane, okay, which is highly folded. Okay, so each fold is referred to as a crista, so plural cristae. And what do you think is the purpose of these foldings or this cristae? Like if you're going to get the outer mitochondrial membrane, spread it, and then the inner mitochondrial membrane, spread it, so which would have a larger surface area. Of course, it's the inner mitochondrial membrane. So the more surface area, the more ATPs will be produced. So in our discussion of cellular respiration, you would see that the inner mitochondrial membrane contains the enzymes necessary for ATP production. Okay? And then you have the fluid-filled matrix. Okay? Ito, you have the fluid filled space. So this is referred to as the matrix. So this contains water, ions, electrolytes, enzymes, again necessary for ATP production. Okay? So in terms of presence, so the mitochondria are universally present in almost all types of cells except for mature red blood cells. And we're going to discuss that when we go to cellular respiration. So why is it that the mitochondria are not present in mature red blood cells? Okay, now in plants, we have another organelle, okay, energy-related organelle. So we have the chloroplast. So from the term chloroplast, so this is this organelle contains chlorophyll, the green pigment. That's why most of the plants are green. And the chlorophyll molecules are very important in harvesting solar energy. And they are converting solar energy to become two forms of chemical energy. So you're going to discuss that in the process of photosynthesis. Okay. So if the mitochondrion is a double membraned organelle, the chloroplast is a triple membraned organelle. So you have the outer chloroplast membrane, the inner chloroplast membrane, and the third membrane, which is referred to as the thylakoid. Okay? And what is special about the thylakoid is that it's also arranged. No, they are like a pile of coins. Okay, so the thylakoid membrane is highly folded and it's arranged, no, like a pile of coins. So each pile is called a granum. So you have your several grana. And like the cristae of the mitochondrion, the grana are responsible for increasing surface area. Okay, so so that more solar energy can be harvested and can be converted to chemical energy. And the chemical energy will be utilized in the production of carbohydrates. So again, the details will be discussed in your botany, in the discussion of photosynthesis. Okay. Now, the fluid-filled space is the stroma. It also contains water, ions, electrolytes, and enzymes necessary for carbohydrate synthesis and also ATP production. Okay. So, yeah. And if you were to see a micrograph of a plant cell, you can actually see the chloroplast. No? This is the beautiful thing about being pigmented. You can see it under the microscope. Okay, so hopefully you'll have your laboratory soon. Okay. Okay, so another group, we have the peroxisomes and the vacuoles. Okay, so peroxisomes, they're also called microbodies. Okay, and the peroxisomes are found in both the plant and animal cells. Okay, and why is it called as such? No? Why is it called a peroxisome? Because it's able to produce, okay, and convert hydrogen peroxide. Okay, hydrogen peroxide is a toxic compound. No? So the peroxisomes are responsible for not only cleaning, no, it's not really cleaning the cell, but detoxifying the cell. So those toxic compounds that cannot be rid by the lysosomes, they are now being taken care of by the peroxisomes. Okay, so hence the name peroxisomes. So what happens? So the different organic compounds, not toxic organic compounds like methanol, ethanol, phenol, formaldehyde. That's why formalin is harmful, no? And then you have nitrites. Nitrites are preservatives. So for those who are fond of eating tocino, longanisa, ham, preserved foods, no, they have a lot of nitrites, and nitrites are toxic to the body. Okay, so what a peroxisome does, so by the way, this is the representation of the peroxisome in a plant cell. Okay, what a peroxisome does is that this now converts or oxidizes organic compounds to become hydrogen peroxide. And okay, the oxidation is because of the work of an enzyme called oxidase. So we're going to discuss more on oxidation reduction when we go to cellular respiration. So another um, term, no, to simply put it, so oxidase degrades, no? It makes a more complex molecule to become a simpler one, no? Again, it's going to be explained when we go to cell respiration. So organic compounds are now oxidized to become hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. And H2O2 is also toxic to the cell. It shouldn't go out of the peroxisome because it can harm the other parts of the cell. So what the peroxisome does is it further converts hydrogen peroxide to simpler compounds. You have water and oxygen that could be utilized by the body, that could be utilized by the cell rather. And the conversion of hydrogen peroxide to water and oxygen is the work of another enzyme. So that's catalase. Okay? So the good thing about the peroxisome is that it's able to detoxify toxic compounds, convert them to hydrogen peroxide, which is also toxic to the cell, but hydrogen peroxide remains within the same compartment and it is now degraded to become simpler and to become usable forms. Okay? So if you're familiar with agua oxinada, so that's hydrogen peroxide. And in the olden days, hydrogen peroxide is utilized to clean wounds. Okay, and this is not utilized now because hydrogen peroxide can damage healthy cells, okay, around the wounded area. So we are now using betadine, diba? One of the brand names. Okay, so that's the importance of peroxisomes or the microbodies. And in the body, the peroxisomes are most numerous in our liver and our kidneys because they are the major detoxifying organs, especially our liver. So you have to take care of your liver. You have to help your liver cells. Don't eat a lot of foods with preservatives. No, don't drink a lot of alcohol because you are uh, giving your liver and your kidney a lot of work. Okay, so love them because your survival depends on the detoxifying functions of the liver and the kidneys. Okay, what else? Okay, peroxisomes. Now we have the central vacuole. So the central vacuole is found in plants. Okay, so most of the time, okay, the nucleus of a plant cell is seen forced, no, or forced or pushed to the side? It's because the larger surface area or the larger space is occupied by the central vacuole. Of course, it's not seen because not all central vacuoles can contain pigments. So most of them are transparent. Okay. So the central vacuole is responsible for osmoregulation. Okay, that would be related to your topic on the positive processes on osmosis. So it's capable of regulating the amount of water within the plant cell. So it stores water. And when the cell is subjected to a hypotonic solution or to a solution containing more water, so water molecules now enter the cell and uh, goes to the central vacuole. And this now causes an increase in the pressure. So this makes the cell turgid. It's like if you're eating fresh vegetables, no crispy vegetables. So it's because of the turgidity, or it's because of the presence of more water inside the cell. Okay. So the vacuole does not only store water, it also stores nutrients. It also stores proteins, enzymes, ions. It also stores waste. Okay, because the plants, they did not really develop or they did not evolve, okay, a system of ridding themselves of waste. So the lysosomes, no, are absent in plant cells. So in place, the functions of the lysosomes are performed by the central vacuole. Okay. The vacuole also contains pigments. That's why in your laboratory experiments where you are utilizing the rayodiscolor, no, the one with the violet pigment, so the pigment is also contained within the vacuole. Okay, what else? Ayan. Okay, so last, you have the cytoskeleton. So when you say cytoskeleton, okay, does this mean that the cell has bones? Of course not, no? Because bones are tissues, eh? And we're talking here of a cell. Okay, so you don't say, you don't always associate skeleton with bones. So skeleton means framework. And we have here different proteins, okay, acting as a framework to support the cell. Okay, so there are three uh, protein cytoskeletal elements. So we have the microtubule. So this one. So it's made up of tubulin subunits. So again, they're all proteins. So it's about, in terms of diameter, it's about 25 nanometers in diameter. And if you're not familiar with how small 1 nanometer is, okay, hopefully you already did your micrometry in the laboratory. So if you're going to get 1 millimeter and then divide that into 1,000 divisions, you get 1. So that's 1 micron or 1 micrometer. Now, if you divide that 1 micron into, again, no, 1,000 divisions, and then you get 1, that's 1 nanometer. So that's how small 1 nanometer is. Okay, so the microtubule is about 25 nanometers in diameter. Okay, the second, we have the intermediate filaments. Okay, I don't have a label here. So this one. So you have here the intermediate. Okay, the intermediate filaments. Okay, they are called intermediate filaments because the size is intermediate of that of the microtubule, which is the largest, and the microfilament, which is the smallest. Okay, so the intermediate filaments, eto, sila yan. Okay, they are tough, they are strong, they are very strong, they are very tough, they are insoluble, and they provide structural reinforcement within the cell. They are responsible for maintaining the shape of the cell. They are also responsible for holding the organelles in place. Like for example, no, again, in an animal cell, most of the time you would see the nucleus at the center because the nucleus is held in place by the intermediate filaments. They also hold other organelles in place. Okay? And being very strong and very tough, again, they provide structural support, structural reinforcement. You can compare them to the scaffoldings now when houses or buildings are built. So there are different scaffoldings. Okay. And then the third type, you have the microfilaments. So they are the smallest. So they are about 8 nanometers in diameter. So again, they are named, the cytoskeletal elements are named as such due to their diameter. So the microtubules, they are like small tubes, so they are the largest in terms of diameter, followed by the intermediate filaments, followed by the smallest, which are the microfilaments. Okay. Now the microfilaments are important. Now they play a role in almost all types of contractility and motility, or simply all forms of movement of the cell. Okay, and it also helps the intermediate filaments and the microfilaments in maintaining the shape of the cell. So in our discussion of the muscular system, you would be introduced to two microfilaments. You have the thin and the thick filaments, the actin and the myosin proteins, and they're responsible for the shortening or the contraction of a muscle. Okay. Okay. In relation to the microtubule, okay, it's also very important in movement because the microtubule actually forms the cilia and the flagella. Okay, so the cilia and the flagella are two locomotory organs. So these are the cilia. So if the processes are numerous, okay, but shorter, so they are referred to as cilia. And if the processes are longer but fewer, they are referred to as the flagella. So singular cilium, singular flagellum. Okay, and in the body, mostly we have ciliated cells, like the ciliated cells of our trachea, ciliated cells lining the uterus, the fallopian tube, ciliated cells lining the ventricles of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, mostly the reproductive tracts, no? And in the human body, there is only one flagellated cell, and that's the sperm cell. So girls, we don't have flagellated cells. We only have ciliated cells. Okay? Now, if you're going to get one cilium and one flagellum and make a cross-section or transverse section, okay, you would see that the cilium and the flagellum, no, they are made up of microtubules. And in terms of arrangement, the microtubules follow the 9 plus 2 arrangement. So what does this mean? It means that there are 9 pairs of microtubules forming a ring around 2 single central microtubules. That's why you have 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, plus 1, 2. So 9 plus 2 arrangement. Okay. Also, with that, also the same as that of the cross-section of a flagellum. Ganon din. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plus 2. Okay. So when these microtubules rearrange, this now causes the movement of the cilium and the flagellum. Okay. Now another organelle, okay, that is made up of the microtubules is the centriole. Okay, so if you're going to locate a dense area of cytoplasm near the nucleus, so that's referred to as the centrosome. Centrosome. Okay, so again, that's a dense area of cytoplasm near the nucleus. So the centrosome, okay, in animal cells, actually supports a pair of centrioles. And the centrioles, they are at right angles. They are perpendicular to one another. And again, if you're going to see the composition of a centriole, so this time it's made up of 9 triplets of microtubules. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, but there are no single microtubules at the center. They only form a ring. Okay, so what's the purpose of the centrioles? So in an undividing cell, the centrioles are the centers for organizing microtubules. So we said that the microtubules, I forgot to mention that pala. In terms of function, the microtubules, they are responsible for supporting the cell, maintaining the shape of the cell, and they act as conveyor belts or roads or tracks. Okay, that would now transport different molecules or different organelles to different destinations within the cell. Okay, so for example, if an area of the cell needs more ATP, the microtubules would reorganize, would form a road or a track or a conveyor belt, okay, to transport more mitochondria to that area because that area needs more ATP. Okay, so imagine there are railroad tracks or train tracks within the cell, and those tracks are formed by the microtubules. Okay, so going back, it says here that in a non-dividing cell, the centrioles are responsible for reorganizing the microtubules to form these tracks. Okay, and in a dividing cell, in preparation for cell division, the centrioles are responsible for organizing microtubules to form the spindle fibers. I guess everybody is familiar with the spindle fibers. So they're responsible for separation of the chromosomes during the process of cell division. Okay, so you have here the two pairs of centrioles in a dividing cell. Okay, now apart from the organelles, there are also temporary structures within the cell, and we are calling them inclusions. So again, the organelles are more or less permanent structures and inclusions are temporary structures. So examples are the vesicles, right? The vesicles are temporary. So they can be formed from the Golgi complex, but once they fuse with the membrane or with other parts, they disappear. Okay? So another example of an inclusion is the fat droplet, okay, in cells that can accumulate fats. So another, you have pigments, and pigments are again housed within the central vacuoles. Okay, and then we have crystals. Okay, crystals can be protein in nature. It can be mga oxalate crystals, no? And crystals are examples of secondary metabolites that are produced by the plant cells. And again, they are housed within the central vacuole. And most of the crystals are waste products of the cells. And being waste products, the plant cells are not really affected, but the secondary metabolites can be used to defend themselves against herbivory. So animals, they know what plants to eat and what plants not to eat. So they know the plants with toxic crystals. Okay. Then another, we have the granules. Like this is a starch granule. So within a plant cell, especially in the regions that are specialized in storing starch, like for example, storage roots and fruits. Okay, so they have starch granules. Okay, now to summarize, so what are some differences between an animal cell and a plant cell? So first, you have the presence of the cell wall. So take note, the cell wall, again, is only present in a plant cell. Okay, this is absent in an animal cell. So both the animal cell and the plant cell are surrounded by the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is still responsible for the selectivity, no, for choosing substances, no, that can pass through the membrane. So the cell wall of plants is mainly for maintaining the shape of the plant cell and for protecting the plant cell from bursting when this plant cell is subjected to a hypotonic solution. Again, you're going to discuss that when you go to your transport processes. Okay? So another, you have the centriole. The centriole is found only in an animal cell. Okay, it's absent in a plant cell. So how would you, so ma'am, how would the plant cell organize its microtubules without the centriole? So it still has the centrosome. So that's the role of the centrosome. No? It's responsible for the organization of the microtubules for the different purpose or different purposes. Okay. Another, you have lysosomes. No? So again, lysosomes are found in animal cells, but they are absent in plant cells. And in lieu of the lysosomes, you have the functions of the vacuole, the central vacuole. Okay. And another difference in terms of shape, so plants have more regular shapes, okay, compared to animals. So depending on the type of animal cell, we have a circular cell, we have a cuboidal cell, a columnar cell, a stellate cell. So plant cells mostly they are rectangular or polygonal in shape. Okay, so this table summarizes the differences between a typical plant cell and a typical animal cell. So we've mentioned this already, and I guess we have another difference now. You have the presence of the plasmodesmata. So the plasmodesmata are found only in plant cells. Okay, so what are these plasmodesmata? So imagine you have here the cell wall of one plant cell and the cell wall of another plant cell. So during cell division, during the formation of the cell plate, the cell walls, they don't really form completely. There are gaps, okay? There are gaps in between the forming cell walls. So these gaps, no, these membrane line gaps are called the plasmodesmata. So singular plasmodesma, plural plasmodesmata. So you have here the plasmodesmata, okay? And the plasmodesmata are very important so that one plant cell can communicate with the other cell, with the adjacent cell. So you have here an example, an application. You have a cross-section of a root showing the root hair, and then you have the epidermal cells. So when water and minerals enter the root cell, of course, they go to the cytoplasm of one plant cell, and water and minerals can actually stream going to the cytoplasm of another plant cell, okay, through the plasmodesmata. So these pathways here, or these passageways, they are the plasmodesmata. So again, the plasmodesmata allow cytoplasmic streaming so that plant cells can communicate with one another. It's also very important in the passage of water from the soil going to the central area. Okay, so which is the xylem. Okay, so that water can be transported upward the plant body. Okay, so I guess that's it. Now that's the end of the discussion. So if you have questions, you can always chat then you can always refer to the net. If you can find useful references, so it's okay to use them. Okay, I'll be uploading your quiz tomorrow. You can answer that until Sunday if you want. Okay, so again, good luck to everyone.